So welcome to the Project Management Specialist Group, Spring School 2023. Welcome back if you've been attending in previous weeks. We have 4 events over 4 weeks with a theme of responsible project management. And we've had 2 brilliant presentations so far in weeks 1 and 2. And we have another brilliant presentation for you this evening. Dr. Brendan de Cruz is going to tell us about how to enable responsible transformation. So Brendan has been an academic, a teacher, a researcher and a manager at a number of universities, University of South Wales, East London and Northampton. Brendan has been a consultant for many organisations, including the Association for Project Management, and Brendan is currently a business transformation consultant. Brendan's been a great supporter of PROMSG in the past. So welcome, Brendan. It's great to have you with us today. And if you can share your slides, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that introduction. Let me just share my slides. Can you see them?
Yeah, that's great. We can see those.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Hi, I'm Brendan. I'm going to talk to you today about enabling responsible transformation. Those are my contact details if you'd like to get in touch or connect with me on LinkedIn. A little bit about me. Well, kind of John has taken away a little bit of my thunder, but as we're talking about transformation, I'm going to present this to you in a way that talks about my own personal transformation. So I was an academic and all those sorts of roles that I've had in the past, including sort of as an academic, then becoming a kind of a consultant to the APM in terms of developing qualifications and certifications, and then kind of leaving the whole gatekeeper role to become more of a poacher in the world of project management. So actually being a project program manager, working for a number of social care and social housing organizations. And my current role is as a consultant to a large housing association working on a No Homeless Veterans Roadmap research project. I was previously an employee of that organization. And I know John said that I'm a business transformation consultant. Well, I'm aspiring to be a business transformation consultant. I still view myself as a pracademic who does sort of consultancy work in the realms of project program management. But transformation proper is something that, I'll be openly honest, is not something that I would say, been there, done that, invented the t-shirt. But anyway, hopefully today I will present something that gives you an idea about what I mean about transformation and what that might mean for you. So the session today will talk about 5 key things, which I think was in the blurb that was sent out earlier. What's transformation, who's involved, and why should IT-enabled business change become more responsible? I'm also going to talk about leadership of transformational change and linking back to the stuff that Karen talked about in week 1, for those of you who are there, the responsibility principles and the responsible project management movement. I'm also going to touch upon the BCS codes of conduct. My assumption is that some of you, if not all of you, are British Computer Society members. So therefore, these codes of conduct inside out, or perhaps not. But we will reflect on them and how this links into responsibility and responsible project management and responsible transformation, which I will hopefully define as we go through the session. Then we'll talk about moral, ethical, and professional standards and how it's leading to converging mindsets. And at the end of this presentation, I will ask you a few questions about how you think you can kind of make a bigger difference in terms of what you do, what your organization does, and how that will lead to better transformation. So that's kind of my starting pitch, and these are the things I'm going to focus on. So what is transformation? Well, there's a definition. The key things there are profound, fundamental change, altering the very nature of something. It's radical, it's sustainable, and what's transformed cannot go back exactly to what it was before. And the future state is so radically different than the current state that people and culture must change to implement it successfully. And there's a lot of talk about mindsets and behaviors that I will include in this presentation. What does that all mean? Well, typically in a transformation, you don't always know the future state when you begin. You have a rough idea about where you want to go and the reasons for it, but not necessarily everything that, should happen along the way. The change process often emerges as you progress. So how you go about making that change during the transformation could vary depending on where you are. And there are various people involved in that actual decision about how you're going to undertake that change process. And things are changing whilst you're actually implementing changes. And some of you may have heard the acronym VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I recently came across the acronym BANI, which is so new to me. I actually had to write it down: brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. But basically, these are talking about the kind of the environment in which change and transformation is taking place. The BANI one, I think, was brought out to kind of point out it's not the environment that's actually influencing anything, it's our perceptions of it. And you know, different kind of illusions and lenses that we might use when we kind of perceive what's happening within that environment. And some examples of change and transformation, specifically transformation that you might be aware of: well, the butterfly and moth analogy. A caterpillar transforms into either a butterfly or a moth. Back in the day, the alchemists tried to turn lead into gold, and that was a transformation. Those of you who are beer or wine drinkers will know that grapes, hops, and other things can be transformed into wonderful substances that you consume. And some of you may well be involved in the world of digital transformation, and I'll touch upon digital transformation in this presentation. But thinking about, you know, is it really digital transformation, or is it more about people and the things that they can do within the organization as a result of what's been transformed? And, you know, wannabe business transformation consultants like myself are involved in actually navigating through the changes, the transformations that are taking place, including, you know, managing projects, implementing change, and a range of different things that goes on there. And who's doing transformation? Well, I've spent a lot of time talking to various people as part of my work in the APM, as part of my work with BCS and PROMSG. I've talked to people in America. And for me, there are kind of three main folk that are involved. And I've just described them as strategy folk. So on the left-hand side, you can see these are people who are involved in finding the future, and the sorts of things that they'll think about are target operating models, future states, what's going to happen in the future, and how do they take the organization along the way. And that also includes things like governance insurance. So doing the right things and doing things right. But these are kind of, you know, typically high-level C-suite people, but not always. Sometimes these are people at operational level who are thinking about, you know, what transformation means. And it also, in my opinion, includes business analysts who are thinking about, you know, where are we now? Where are we going to go? And what are the things that need to happen to change? Then there are a bunch of people who I've described as change folk. And these are involved in organizational design, thinking about leading and embedding change. In America, something called ProSci is very, very common. And Canada as well. North America is, you know, profoundly linked to the ProSci methodology for change management. And there are UK equivalents that I'm aware of, but these are people who are making it work, thinking about realizing benefits and managing that transition into whatever future state that we're moving into. And then there are a number of people who I describe as delivery folk. And these are people who are involved in getting it done. And I've described that as how and hope, because a lot of it is about managing uncertainty, time, cost, quality, risks, issues, constraints, all the sorts of things that project managers are involved in, but also program managers. And I used, when I was an academic, the OO model. So projects deliver outputs, programs deliver outcomes, portfolios deliver objectives, and PMOs are involved in optimizing all of the kind of the various things that are delivering there. You may have come across that before, but I think I invented it, so perhaps not. But I find it's really, really useful to get across the idea of what's happening in the world of project, program, and portfolio management. And then, of course, there are people who are involved in communications and engaging with stakeholders. And there are a bunch of people who are involved in kind of developing capability and competency. That's typically your HR department or your people services. What interests me now is who have we got in the audience? And kind of what kind of folk do you think you are? So we have a poll here. I'm going to hand back to John or whoever's working that to actually throw that poll out for me, please. So which of the three folk do you most identify with? Simple question. Okay, we're getting there.
So that's a small victory for the delivery category there at currently standing at 47%. In second place, strategy at 35%, and then change at 18%.
Okay, great. That's interesting, and that actually makes it quite useful in the Zoom rooms later, because we'll have a variety of people with a range of different experiences that they can talk about. Okay, I will close that poll. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. John, can I carry on?
Sure, Brendan. You can we can share the results if you want to share them with everybody. Oh no, we stopped sharing. So yeah, I think we're done with that, aren't we? Do carry on. Thank you.
Okay. So. Right, yeah, I mean, I describe that as folklore, because, you know, kind of how often do those roles, does the role that you have and your job title and your description fit nicely and tidily into any of those boxes? And I think kind of we all do a little bit of some of the other things, and we all work together in teams. And you know, as an organization, it's highly unlikely that you wouldn't do something that's in another one of those three things. But from my kind of perception of what's going on, it is a useful way to kind of think about the different activities that go out there, and particularly the different communities of people that are involved in delivering transformation. Why does it matter? Well, we've talked about responsible project management, but I've had kind of conversations with Karen and others about, you know, should it be called accountable project management? Because ultimately, you know, someone somewhere is accountable, the buck stops with them, and responsibility typically is about passing on the buck, or kind of giving people the responsibility for delivering various things. You know, this is a tautological discussion that you know may not lead anywhere, but I think kind of we are all accountable in whatever way for whatever it is we're doing, and whether we're delivering, or we're involved in change management, or we're involved in kind of envisioning the future as a strategic part of transformation. It's still about thinking about how we can play a role in the bigger picture and what's going on, and the impact that we have in terms of the projects and programs that we deliver, and on the world. You know, the bigger picture stuff that we have going on is fundamental. And I know that Karen has been talking quite profoundly about sustainability and the environment, but it's not just about sustainability from an ecological and an environmental perspective. It's also about the other things that happen within the world of computing and IT. And if we treat IT and computing as a delivery or an enabler of change and transformation, then we can see that kind of, you know, people are involved. Yeah. The sort of transformation that we're trying to deliver is kind of linked to the Spider-Man diagram in the top right-hand corner. I'm a sci-fi geek, I'll admit that, and you will see examples of that throughout the presentation. In Spider-Man, there's a quote that says, "With great power comes great responsibility." And you know, we have that power. We have the ability to kind of, you know, either deliver good things or bad things through the way in which we transform. I'm not talking power in the kind of the electrical power transformer thing in the left-hand corner. I'm talking more about the transformers from the cartoon. And if you're sad like I am, you'll know that there were two types of transformer, Autobots and Decepticons, which had very different views of the world. So what does it mean for computing? Well, I'm hoping that Rashik will pick up on this next week in his presentation. But if technology is an enabler of both good and bad transformation, what are the sorts of things that we're going to encounter? I know you've already talked about with Karen data centers, which are cloud-based. They're typically expensive, inefficient, and, you know, often they're outsourced. And there are lots of issues around, you know, how much energy they use, the heat that they generate. Karen talked about rivers being kind of filled with hot water that's killing fish. But I've very recently encountered a situation where a data center was powering a swimming pool in, I think it's Exmouth in Devon, which I think is a brilliant idea, that, you know, kind of thinking about forward planning and where we position these sorts of things, so that we've linked up those very dissimilar types of activities in a way that's beneficial for for society, and also saving costs for the swimming pool, and actually kind of enabling the data center to do things that are good for the planet. Coding is, I don't know how many programmers are out there or systems developers. I started life with a computing degree and spent a year as an applications programmer. And, in those days, we didn't think about, what kind of code we needed to do to be optimal, to be efficient. But nowadays, people need to think about, reducing energy and how well the code works in terms of, battery usage. Also infrastructure and systems where efficiency is critical, power is used, there's high consumption of resources. And I know systems and enterprise architects are constantly thinking about the bigger picture in terms of energy and infrastructure and how they kind of impact on carbon emissions, and where optimization can be enabled. There's also opportunities for prejudice within systems. And there's lots of examples of where, data and algorithms are unethical and can be used to discriminate or misuse artificial intelligence. Particularly in health informatics, there are examples where the diagnoses and the actual conclusions of these systems are in some way discriminating. There's lots of examples of where social media has been used in a non-helpful way in terms of transformation. So the dark web, cyber stalking, disinformation, biased algorithms. Who knows what's happening in terms of what the cookies are doing? There are lots and lots of kind of things that could go in a way that's not beneficial. And of course, there's lots and lots of examples of cybersecurity, data breaches, hacking, phishing, cybercrime. I'm painting a very, very bleak picture here of what IT and digital transformation is about, but it's not about that. I do honestly believe that IT is there to help and to benefit, and the world would be a far worse place if we weren't using technology and the systems that we are all responsible for kind of delivering in order to benefit people. There's a site there at the bottom that you might want to look at, responsiblecomputing.net, but it's all about rebuilding trust in IT. I'll give you just a quick couple of examples of some of the things that you may have come across. So, for example, the Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen alleged that Facebook actually knew that it was involved in encouraging human trafficking, inciting violence against minorities, extremism, and that actually they were removing less than 1% of violent content, and that they were actually putting profits before people. And I don't know where that went in terms of I'm sure Facebook Meta denied it, but it's something that was certainly alleged. And there are lots of examples that I know Karen talked about, and I think that Rashik will talk about, and perhaps the second presentation by Petrina was thinking about e-waste, particularly, and how to kind of prevent that and reduce it. But in the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, where you've got technologies such as distributed ledgers and blockchain, apparently the amount of energy used to run these things is the equivalent of small countries. So, there are lots and lots of things that are problematic in the world in terms of computing and technology. And the BCS Green survey a couple of years ago showed that people were not confident that the workforce had the right sort of skills to achieve net zero, and that they were not confident that technologies were being used to fight climate change. And lots of people said that, ending device waste should be put first by government and the sector. So I'm a former academic, as I pointed out. Here's a bit of revision for you. Karen talked about the responsible project management principles, but kind of for me, they apply at a number of different levels: personal, professional, organization, and societal. And kind of what I'm going to do for the remainder of the presentation is to start thinking about how these are varying and how they link into the British Computer Society codes of conduct, and in terms of transformation, and how these things can change organizations, change society, and change how we behave as part of that. The Agile Manifesto, on which the RPM principles were based, kind of tipped the balance. I remember when Agile first came out, people were lots and lots of conversations, lots and lots of discussion. And I think it's now the prevalent methodology, the prevalent approach in terms of the way in which people develop IT systems. Karen talked a little bit about that, but my hope is that now that we're talking about responsible project management in a way that, sustainability and EDI and ESG and all these various things that are important to the world, perhaps they will have a lot more traction in terms of how we include them when we transform organizations and how we build and develop and deliver our projects, programs, and portfolios, which involve systems. And I've had a go at defining responsible transformation. I looked on the internet, and to be honest, I couldn't find anything that was, particularly useful. So I borrowed from Professor Alan Brown's definition of digital transformation, which is in a number of BCS publications, to come up with a definition of responsible transformation. And I'll just read that for you. Responsible transformation describes a broad set of imperatives and activities aimed at profoundly altering an organizational context and its prevailing culture, including mindsets and behaviors in radical and sustainable ways to benefit individuals and organizations as aligned to the wider interests of society and the planet. Now breathe. I accept it's quite meaty, it's quite wordy, and if you can come up with a better definition, I'd love to see that. But for me, it kind of encompasses the sorts of things that we're thinking about here. We're changing mindsets and behaviors so that people actually buy into those changes. And we're thinking about transformation from a point of view that it's good for the planet, it's good for society, but we can't go back to the way it was before. And it's radical in that we're actually, trying to make those changes. So, having defined responsible transformation, what does good look like? What is a good responsible transformation? And I'm a member of something called the Transformation Leaders Hub, and one of the founders of that particular movement is Tony Lockwood, and he talks about sort of 6 core elements for successful transformation. And what I'm going to do now is run through these so that it gives you a better feeling about what transformation is and what it does, but thinking about those responsibility principles and how they might be ingrained in that. So let's take you through each of these so that you understand what's going on through the transformation process. And the first one of these is strategic alignment. So we're thinking about the overall strategy and the goals. We're thinking about purpose, objectives, outcomes, which obviously lead into the outputs that come out of our projects. And we're trying to align our portfolio of change initiatives to the strategy and to what we're trying to deliver. So this includes the responsible why. Yeah, it gets us to think about, not just what it is we're trying to deliver and why it is we're trying to deliver it, what the triggers are, what the drivers are for that transformation, but what other effects and particular contexts we want to include in that. And we think about the benefits and the key performance indicators to include the RPM principles, whether those are sustainable development goals or whether those are other things that are high priority for us or the society or the context in which we operate, is entirely down to the individuals who are leading that kind of transformation. So, for example, low energy infrastructure for data centers might be one of the things we want to set out right at the beginning when we are coming up with our plans for the future. Or it could be that the drivers are regulatory compliance and cost reductions, but in ways that we can kind of embed the responsible principles in there. So good for the environment and good for people and good for other things that are out there. This will involve mainly the strategy and change management folk, but there needs to be some sort of strategic alignment so the delivery folk are involved as well, to make sure that these things are actually viable and deliverable. And we commonly see that sort of transformations start with people saying, I want to do this, that, and that. And the people at the bottom are going, that's not going to work, I'm afraid. Yeah, and we need to kind of make sure that there is alignment between all the various people driving that transformation for it to be successful. And there are, lots and lots of studies that have shown that many transformations fail because we don't get that alignment from the very beginning. Number 2 is change management. And I was pleased to see in the poll that there are a number of change managers here, or people who consider themselves involved in change management, because this is critical to the success of the transformation. And these people are involved in identifying and managing resistance to change, communicating the vision and the benefits of the transformation, answering the question, what's in it for me? And it's all about engaging stakeholders in that process. It's mainly the change management folk, but will involve other folk as required. And it's about preparing for and managing the transition and thinking about more responsible ways of working. So, for example, bringing people on board through peer advocates and champions and getting people to kind of, drive forward the change by being a part of it. And at a higher level, obviously, we talk about sponsors and we talk about kind of, customer involvement. co-production, lots and lots of different things are applied here to get that buy-in from the organization and its customers and its stakeholders in different ways. Sorry, number 3 is all about culture change. And this either supports or hinders the overall success of the transformation, but it's about supporting the business sustainability, not the environmental sustainability, but the business sustainability of a transformation, making it stick. That's a 3-word slogan that's very common these days in politics. But it's thinking about responsibility as integrated and not an add-on. And here we try and promote things like innovation, collaboration, continual improvement. It all depends on whether our transformation is evolutionary, as in taking place over a longer period of time and gradual, and kind of that change is being embedded in a way that kind of gets people involved more slowly, or is revolutionary, so kind of is implemented very quickly. Kind of there's not a lot of opportunity for people to kind of buy into it, but is necessary. And either of those scenarios is something that can happen in a transformational environment. It's mainly led by strategy folk, but all folk in brackets should be involved in this endeavor. And I know from my experiences of having gone through transformational projects and programs that that's not the case. Often, strategy folk just impose these things on us, and things go horribly wrong. And the actual benefits that we wanted out of that transformation don't actually occur. It's difficult to measure whether or not we've had culture change until after the transformation is delivered. And often we see situations where people think about, is that good or is that good enough? The analogy here is obviously in the world of Agile, where we talk about things like minimal viable product. But, actually getting to the end stage of a transformation that you started out with is very, very difficult when we're talking about culture, because culture is one of the really, really difficult things to think about. But it is important because we need to embed revised principles, policies, practices, processes, organizational values. And often these are underpinned by systems, data, web-based systems that kind of, show those policies, access, collaboration tools. All these various things are part and parcel of the culture in which we want that transformation to deliver. Number 4 is process improvement. And I would imagine a lot of the people who are involved as delivery folk are involved in this. And we should typically first streamline and optimize our business processes, and then technology enables this. And I will question, I would love to know at the end whether those people who are involved in digital transformation think this is what they do. Is it the business that starts the process improvement, or are you looking at ways in which the technology drives those business changes? I know I've had conversations as an academic about the way you should do it, but I know now that technology is moving so rapidly that new things come along and can radically transform things, because you have to do that to keep up with your competition, and you have to do that because people are no longer able to use the systems that you used before. But the key thing here is to identify areas for improvement, create new processes, and to think about the transformation objectives that will actually deliver those new working processes. So, for example, more productivity for less cost and effort. How do you go about doing that? What kind of things are involved? And that will mean changes for people, as well as the systems that they will be required to use. This will be mainly delivery folk who are working with change folk. And the things we'll see here are process maps. We'll be talking about target operating models, and we'll be really looking at the benefits we want to get out of our actual transformation program. Number 5 is where many of us will definitely be involved, because technology adoption is a key part of a transformation. So it's a critical enabler of success, but we want to make sure that we have the right technology for the right reasons, with people delivering it that have the right skill sets, as well as people who are using it who have the right skill sets. So, we don't ignore on training, we don't ignore on documentation, we don't ignore on, the way in which people will engage and use the systems that we deliver in order to get the benefits that we want. And the culture and the processes that support that need to be in line with what it is we set out to do in the first place. Technology of itself is not the solution. We need to go back to why we wanted to do it in the first place. And often we see examples of where delivering a new system actually leads to further problems or additional problems that we didn't think about, because we thought that this solution would take away all the pain that we had. And sadly, that's not the case. This is mostly delivery folk who are supported by other folk, but the things we need to think about here is the physical space that we need to use for whatever it is we're transforming into, energy consumption, data center emissions, the supply chain, use of toxic materials, water pollution, waste, loads and loads of things that go beyond just the world of IT, but also the way in which the technology and the systems are used, and the people, how they engage with that, and you know, kind of the general kind of environment in which the things that have been transformed will operate. And around that, we have all the challenges of cybersecurity, resilience, business recovery, virtualization, a range of things that you know, how people engage with systems and technologies, the choices that we make, and the way in which we adopt technology is really, really important for the success of a transformation. And the final one here is well, monitoring and adjustment. So basically reporting, thinking about how we measure what we're doing along the way during the transformation. It's ongoing and we must continuously do it. It's not something you do right at the beginning and then look at the end and think, right, have we done it or not? Throughout the process of transformation, we think about how are things going, what needs to change, regular progress reviews. And, you know, independent assurance is something that the APM and I'm sure BCS kind of advocate, because we shouldn't be marking our own homework. You know, we should have people kind of helping us understand whether or not we're doing the right things and we're doing them in the right way. And we also need to think about whether the transformation still aligns with our initial strategy and our goals, and whether we need to change that, because the world is VUCA, the world is BANI, you know, and we want to try and avoid delays. We want to avoid situations where we don't have the benefits we set out to achieve, and we don't want to have overruns. And we can also build confidence by actually demonstrating that the transformation is working and that the things that we wanted to see are there. But it means we can also change direction if things are not working the way that we want them to do when we started out. And this will mainly be strategy and delivery folk, but you know, I would imagine that, you know, the change folk are very much involved in this behind the scenes. And the idea that, are we nearly there yet? Well, the idea of a jigsaw and a big picture, thinking about how it all fits together in terms of what it is we want to transform, and giving the board or giving people in very senior level an idea of whether or not that's working. And I'm sure the PMO has a crucial role here to kind of show that the, you know, the transformation is working in terms of the systems and the projects that we're trying to deliver, but also the outcomes that we want to see in terms of people working in new ways, and you know, improvements in productivity or whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. So I've waffled on there for quite a while, and I now have a little activity for you which involves Zoom rooms. Basically, we're going to throw you into a number of Zoom rooms to have conversations. I've talked about what good looks like and what responsible transformation should be delivering. But we know that there are examples of bad, inverted commas, transformations, and one of which is the Horizon IT project for the post office. I don't know how many of you are outside of the UK, but certainly those of you who are in the UK will have heard in the news about this particular project that was supposed to transform the way in which post office operated and the way in which post office counters were operated. But it led to situations where the technology told senior managers that there was people defrauding and committing crimes based on the way in which was accounting for some of their transactions. And many people went to prison as a result of this. And it took a very long period of time for them to have justice and to be proven that it wasn't them that was committing these things, it was the software. But there was a bit of a cover up and a bit of a, you know, political context. And then there's also the European Super League to take it outside of the world of IT. You know, there's this grand idea for those of you who understand football to combine the top Premier League teams with some of those top teams in other European countries and to create the Super League. That did not go down very well. Yeah, or you can use your own examples. What I want you to do in your groups is to talk about transformations that you are aware of but didn't deliver what it was that they set out to do. Who should have been held accountable for this, and what could have been done differently? And particularly, was there anything good that ultimately came out of this? Certainly with the European Super League example, there are things that are good that came from it. And I would argue that there are good things that came out of the Horizon IT project, but I'm not going to give you those until you've had a chance to discuss within your groups. So I throw it over to you, whoever's setting up the Zoom rooms. Please put people into their rooms and please chat. That I think there were. Welcome back. Let's just go around the forums that that we have and just see what people have been talking about. Is there anybody from room 1 who'd like to feedback on what they talked about?
Sure, Brendan. So we were talking about a couple of things. One of them about the idea that change management is really key, and having someone who can be assigned to that in the project. It allows for better ability to apply the projects to meet people's needs. And there was sort of an alternative point of perspective, which was there was a dashboard project where it was creating metrics which really made no sense for the business. And that seemed to be the key. We had a little bit of a tech issue with, we ended up having to chat over over the chat versus talking. So, but that was some two key points.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody in group 2 like to feedback?
I'm not sure if we were group 2. I think we were. For the Horizon project, we talked about that and talked about the fact that what should have been done differently really was that there was a lack of what was known at the coalface of the system development really percolating up to senior management who were prepared to listen and actually do something about it, because there was, plenty of coverage after the event with people talking about how they'd known that the system was not fit for purpose, and so that's kind of what we thought there. And we talked about the fact that these days there seems to be less interest really in people in sort of senior positions and in the public eye in actually resigning when, in the past I think they would have said, okay, this is on my watch and I'm resigning, and it's my responsibility kind of thing. The European Super League, we kind of thought that was probably ill-conceived from the beginning, and a poor idea to take the value out of the different leagues and effectively leave them with something that wasn't very good. In terms of our own experience, we talked about how projects are often kind of oversold, and sponsors are not terribly, or not always very realistic, and don't necessarily themselves drive things through to conclusions. So I think that was our feedback.
That's thank you for that. And the absent sponsor is a real problem with transformation programs, because they're there at the beginning and then you hardly see them. Yeah, and good transformations, or the ones I've been involved with, the people are there throughout, and you very clearly identify the buy-in and the leadership and the kind of the involvement and the vested interest of senior stakeholders in the actual transformation itself. But that's interesting. Thank you. Anybody from group 3 like to feedback?
There's a message in chat from Alice saying, sorry, she can't do it. Can someone else feedback?
I'll speak on behalf of Alice. Okay, it's David. Yeah, we sort of looked at the Horizon IT. Sorry, I've got my video on the mic. Come on. Yeah, I'm there. Okay. We looked at the Horizon IT project, and we sort of focused a bit on the different sort of stakeholder groupings there. And we're particularly interested, it wasn't just the post office. I think they had maybe Fujitsu, if I remember rightly, as a supplier. And then, of course, the major group were the users, the sort of small, I think it was sort of sub-post offices, postmasters, etc. And so what we sort of looked at as some of perhaps the lessons that were were learnt around this is the need for more of a sort of informed, intelligent customer type function, maybe within the post office. And clearly, when we sort of reflected a little bit on those 6 core elements of a successful transformation, and we felt that a lot of those weren't sort of handled rightly. I think somebody's already talked about change management, but the cultural change, the technology adoption, a small post office isn't like the IT department in the sort of post office generally. And so we felt that perhaps there wasn't enough sort of I suppose mentoring and getting ready for the transition. The other aspect we felt in terms of, I mentioned the intelligent or informed customer. We think that within Fujitsu, if you were a test manager, you perhaps knew just how much of that functionality had test coverage, etc. And I think that wasn't sort of perhaps asked for by the post office as such. They weren't sort of basically keeping themselves informed, and therefore it was just the relationship that was breaking down between the post office and their users as such, i.e. the blame was all on the sub postmasters. They didn't sort of necessarily go back to the supplier, but I suspect internally within the supplier organization there would have been subject matter experts in there, test managers, etc., that knew that there was issues with that functionality. So I think that's basically anybody else from our group 3 can jump in, but I think that's what Alice was
that's
going to
great.
say. Is
Thank
that
you.
okay?
That's great. That's fabulous.
Right.
And then 2 key points to pick up there is that kind of I think in the world that we live in today, we no longer do things to people, we do things with people. Yeah, and I think that's a massive change in terms of co-production and getting users involved from the outset. And certainly the world of Agile is very much about making sure that voice is captured. Obviously, with the post office scenario, the massive cover up that seems to have taken place afterwards was a challenge, but people somewhere must have known that the code wasn't working as well as it should have done, and the voice of the actual users should have been listened to a lot earlier.
Yes. Yeah.
So thank you for that. Anybody from Group 4 got anything else to add?
Yeah, so we didn't sorry, this is Group 4, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We didn't couldn't think of any specific horror stories as such that were really relevant, but we sort of talked about how there's a few things which all these transformations which go wrong, I guess, have in common. So, for example, a lot of them don't really plan themselves properly. So obviously when you want to make a big change like that, you've got to talk to all the stakeholders who are involved and make sure that they're on board, and then also think through contingencies so you can sort of react when something does go wrong. And that's, I'm sure there's some planning going on in all these regards, but perhaps not enough or not very insightful planning. And we were also talking about how ideally you've really got to look at the perspectives of the stakeholders at different levels. So, for example, your management at the top, or in the instance of the post offices, the post office issue that you were talking about, the customers and the smaller post offices themselves, so that you're aware of the sort of processes and issues which go on at that level and which could also affect it, and can once again plan for that and sort of make your change, I guess, feasible for this, all the stakeholders down at that level. And then, yeah, I guess you also want to incorporate how you want to plan for those people who will be involved at that level, like how this change is going to run, so that you can make the processes, you can tailor them to those people so that they're actually achievable by the people at that level as well. And so it's not just something which the sort of top level management has devised, which doesn't have much relevance or feasibility for the people down at that level.
Yeah. And I think that's what I kind of talked about earlier, that, you know, all the different folk have to be involved for a successful transformation, and that we need to have that alignment, don't we, between those who are tasked to actually deliver these systems, but also those who, you know, are driving that. And, you know, the change folk are very, very important here to kind of, you know, link and bridge and make sure that the environment in which that change and that transformation is happening is buying into that transformation in a way that's going to actually lead to success. So thank you all 4 groups. Hopefully you found that useful, and hopefully you've kind of, you know, had an opportunity to reflect on, you know, things can go horribly wrong, but as a result of that, sometimes, you know, there are lessons learned, or there are things that we can take on board that can be useful in terms of the organization's development, growth, evolution, and future transformation. So certainly within the post office, you know, there's an awful lot more assurance these days in terms of kind of questioning and thinking about what it is that we're trying to deliver. And perhaps we listen to the customer a lot more than we did in the past. And within the kind of the example of football, well, I don't think they're going to go there again anytime soon. Yeah, do you know what I mean? And kind of, you know, the fans' voice was huge. The kind of the uproar about kind of how dare you, yeah, you know, really gave those big six a kicking. And apologies if you happen to support one of those clubs that were driving that kind of activity. So I'm going to return to my slides because I'm conscious of time. So let me share again. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that, Brendan.
Fabulous. I will continue with the slideshow. So why is this all important? You know, here we are on a BCS POMSG session talking about enabling responsible transformation. And hopefully by now you've got a good idea of what transformation is. You've got a good idea of how responsibility plays a role in terms of, you know, enabling successful transformation and you know, the bigger picture that's involved. But who delivers all of these? Well, we do. We do, whether we're strategy folk or we're change folk or we're delivery folk, we're all involved in terms of our skills, our competencies, and what it is that we're trying to deliver. And none of you, interestingly, ticked none of the above in the poll I did earlier. So it means that you all have an interest or a vested interest in each of these different activities in some way. I happen to be a member of 2 professional bodies. I'm a member of the APM, but before that, I looked it up this morning. I joined the BCS in 1999. You know, I'm a chartered IT professional. What does that mean? I am now a chartered project professional. Yes, project management is a profession. And I was involved in a period of time when, you know, there was a lot of high court conversations between professional bodies trying to kind of stall the chartered nature of project professionalism. But APM kind of won out at the end of the day. And it does make a difference, in my opinion, to actually put across this idea that I am a professional. So professionalism is defined in the APM body of knowledge as application of expert and specialized knowledge within a specific field and the acceptance of standards relating to that profession. So standards are really, really important, whether that's APM or BCS. You know, it's really important to have like a benchmark against which we can match ourselves and what we do. And, you know, BCS as a professional body, I know that Rashik will probably talk about this because that's the whole point of the conversation next week on the panel is about institutionalizing responsible project management. I make my apologies now because I will not be able to attend that session next week, but I think it's kind of interesting to think about the role that BCS plays in terms of delivering responsible project management and how IT people or computing people, my first degree was computing and informatics, so I realized that kind of we all define ourselves in different ways. But the BCS is all about supporting careers, sharing expertise, improving education, influencing practice, and driving standards and making IT good for society in accordance with the group annual report from August 2022. And I came across recently a part of the BCS website that actually has some CPD called the Ethical IT Professional, which I can really, really recommend if you're a BCS member, because there were some insights that I hadn't thought about from an IT perspective. I strongly recommend you have a go and work through that if you haven't already. But this idea of ethics and professionalism as part of responsibility is very different from the kind of the conversations perhaps that Karen was having you in the first workshop about, you know, environment and ecology and, you know, the whole sustainable side of the planet. And she talked about people, planet, and prosperity. But I'm also now talking about professionalism, because we are charged with actually delivering the kind of the systems and the technologies that are there as part of the transformations that we are delivering, we're doing. And I'm going to run through the BCS Code of Conduct, which underpins what it stands for, and linking back to the kind of the 4 things that I think that we can change. And so it says in the BCS Code of Conduct, you make IT for everyone, which is a whole piece about public interest. And I'm not going to go through that, but you can think about the societal impact that we have in terms of what we do. And we need to think about all these various things, the protected characteristics, how we promote inclusion, people's rights, security, all those sorts of things, as we talked about, can go horribly wrong if we don't get it right. Yeah. And whether or not we're doing these things for the right reasons in a way that will benefit society. But that public interest is a really, really strong part of the Code of Conduct. It also includes, interestingly, some personal responsibility within the Code of Conduct. So show what you know, learn what you don't. And it's about professional competence and integrity, and not pretending or lying about the skill sets that we may have, and that not trying to do things that we're not able to do, and not claiming a level of competence that we don't possess. And within that, there's a whole bunch of different things about avoiding bribery, seeking out expertise when we need it, understanding the legal context, knowing what technology can and can't do, but also thinking about our personal perspectives in that, and respecting other people's viewpoints. And being able to take criticism. So if assurance picks up on a system and says, you're failing, these are the reasons, that we don't cover it up and we don't hide it. So that kind of personal level of competence is really, really important in terms of the BCS Code of Conduct. There is also within the BCS Code of Conduct some organizational stuff in terms of duty to a relevant authority. Respect the organization or individual you work for. And this thinks about things like conflicts of interest. It thinks about, disclosure and not disclosing it to other people. I would imagine GDPR goes in there, due care, diligence, not misrepresenting or withholding information, all these sorts of things about the organizational context in which we operate and how that is managed. And good governance is key to making sure that we can deliver on this. But we have within the Code of Conduct an obligation to actually understand what it says within the governance codes, and acting in a way that is appropriate. And I think we will, depending on the organization that you work for, this is probably either going to be very tight in terms of employment contracts, or there are going to be areas where you think, oh, well, that could be improved. But BCS certainly, in terms of, once you're chartered, has the ability to strike you off in the way that other professions do. If you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you can be disbarred or discharged based on, incompetence and not following the kind of the guidance that's available to you. And there is also within the BCS Code of Conduct a section on duty to the profession itself. So keep IT real, keep IT professional, pass IT on. And this is, not kind of putting the profession into disrepute, making sure that the standards that are there, and trying to help your fellow members and bring them on and improve the standards that are there, making IT and the profession better. And from a transformational context, this is really important, because professional bodies are a part of that. We don't leave it just to kind of society and organizations to do. There's a helping hand along the way in terms of what the BCS does, or what the APM does, or dare I say, what the PMI does, in terms of making sure that those people who are involved in these things actually understand and know and can deliver on these various aspects. And within BCS is basically delivering what a higher level of the Engineering Council has asked it to do in terms of the Code of Conduct. And within their guidance, it talks about things like honesty and integrity, respect for life, law, the environment, and public good, accuracy and rigor, and leadership and communication. And there's a link there if you want to follow up on that. But certainly I got with my chartered IT professional, I got chartered engineer status. And I did have to prove, obviously, I was doing an engineering related thing, which luckily for me, my PhD was in a realm which was engineering. But kind of, it's part of BCS being a technical profession where technical knowledge and technical expertise and professionalism is really, really important. But all the kind of the softer skills and societal skills are key part of that. And there are competencies that are required. So when Karen talked to you in week 1 about a competence framework for responsible project management, my eyes lit up and I thought, whoa, hey, competent people deliver competent systems, which can only mean, good things for the world that we're trying to deliver through our transformations. So, converging mindsets, moral, ethical, and transformative. I've previously given talks for BCS Proms G on ethics and professionalism, and there are a number of things that I just want to throw into the mix now about ethics, which is not really the focus of this presentation, but it's part of the idea of these different things are now aligning in a way that they haven't before. Yeah. So, in terms of ethics itself and the ethical IT project manager that's put across in the CPD that I was talking about, we'll talk about things like shades of gray, where it's not immediately obvious when something is right or wrong. But there are often circumstances where something is right and more right, or wrong and more wrong. And we might come across the idea of the principle of least harm. So when we have to make decisions, we think about, well, if we pick something that's going to do the least damage, even though it's not the best thing we could do, it's the one that we should go with because it will cause the least damage in the big scheme of things. Because sometimes a decision is required or a solution is required for a particular context, but we need to avoid the slippery slope. So if we do this now, we could end up in a place that's going to be not particularly beneficial. And I think with the example we used with the post office, yeah, clearly once people started covering up for things, it led into circumstances that were not helpful to anybody. And from a reputational point of view for the post office, nobody there was covered in glory. And from a government point of view, particularly the people in charge at the time, again, lots of questions were asked about how was that allowed to happen and why was it allowed to take so long before justice prevailed. And I know at the moment, certain individuals have been in the news trying to defend actions during the COVID pandemic, and whether or not they knew about it. I will leave that there. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. So how would you feel if that was done to you? And being able to empathize and being able to think about it in the way that customers or clients or the recipients of the systems that you're using is really, really important here from an ethical perspective and from a transformational perspective. And also the idea that, does it feel right? Can I sleep at night? Do you have a moral compass? Often some of us have our own values, faith, and behavior. So if we're a part of a religion or a particular grouping that has a particular moral compass, it's really important that we act in ways that are not in contradiction with whatever it is. But sometimes these things are in conflict. And sometimes, the drive for profits and the drive for productivity kind of take over in terms of, not really thinking about what it is we're actually trying to do in terms of what we're delivering. But we live in a world with lots of things going on. So stewardship and activism, for example, the climate change movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, lots and lots of, people talking about social justice and people talking about equity and inclusion, loads and loads of causes that are out there, and can we encompass those in terms of what we're trying to do? And I know that, in the world that I've been operating recently, things like equality, impact assessments are done all the time, data protection impact assessments are done all the time, and thinking about how can we avoid causing harm through what it is we're delivering. And that's done right at the beginning in terms of thinking about it at business case stage. Yeah, not waiting until the end when we've delivered it and then trying to work out whether or not we'll have that damage, but actually thinking about it right earlier on in the project lifecycle, so that we make sure that we avoid decisions or solutions that will drive us in ways that will cause damage to others. However, we will always see situations where there's denial, evasion, and ambivalence. And that's in anybody read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will know is an SEP or somebody else's problem. Yeah, it isn't. It isn't. I've used a little kind of caption there of Zaphod Beeblebrox, who was president of the galaxy. But that's the kind of a character who's got good and bad. We're all kind of morally challenged. We're all kind of, have different mindsets in conflict. But, I think we now live in a world where, climate change denying is not a good thing. Yeah. That we understand that the consequences of our action can be profound, and that we need to act in a way that's going to benefit, and that everything that we do, whether that's work or home or whatever context, kind of fits together in terms of making the world a better place and transforming the things that we want. And if we don't do it now, well, who will? And if not us, yeah, then how can we rely on others to do that. It isn't somebody else's problem, it's ours as well. But that's all about our own culture, our personality, and our own professionalism. And what we're trying to do, certainly the BCS and the APM and professional bodies, and what I'm trying to put across today is that we can play a role in that. And we need to focus on the why, not just the how and the what, and never lose sight of that kind of bigger picture. And those kind of mindsets are kind of converging now in a way that we haven't seen below. Karen talked about what was going on in terms of the iceberg, what's happening that we can't see. Well, we want to ask the question, what is it we can't see? Yeah, and how can we kind of understand that better? And this leads to the idea of reflective and reflexive practice, which I've come across in the world of social housing and in social care, where in the past we'd be all thinking about reflective practice, which is thinking, values, feelings, understanding, etc. But now we're more focusing on reflexive practice, which builds on reflective practice, but we start to think about what other people are thinking. And we try to understand their perspective and to put that into kind of how we think and how we will, the whole cause and effect. How would we change what we do and what we deliver in a way that thinks about other people's assumptions, their prejudices, or how they kind of operate in a way that can benefit what it is we're trying to deliver. And that's a competence in itself. Thinking about diverse perspectives clearly helps us to become more responsible project practitioners, and that is throughout the kind of the whole transformational process, by using co-production, by getting people on board, by asking those questions. It's not the whole illusion of consultation, which may have taken place in the past, but actually getting people's voices on board and actually challenging them to think about, well, if we do this, or if this system operates in this way, what will happen? Yeah, is that a good thing? And their buy-in is crucial for success of the transformation. So I'm throwing this out there because we're going to maybe have time for a few questions, but basically, are you being responsible in enabling transformation? Why and how can those operating this space become more responsible and accountable? In terms of strategy change and delivery, how can those who are leading it benefit from learning and experience? And all of you, depending on where you could be early stage of your career or you could be late in your career, but that learning is really important in terms of taking on board those responsibility principles and actually putting them into practice. And finally, at those 4 different levels that we talked about, personally, professionally, organizationally, and societally, how can you make a bigger difference in what you do and how you do it? And interestingly, the BCS Code of Conduct actually seems to work in that way. So some final thoughts. The challenges. We will always find the challenge of agreeing the why. Yeah, from a transformation perspective, unless you have a very strong leader or CEO or whoever's driving the transformation says, we're going to do this because, and you buy into it, there is always going to be kind of, not so sure. Yeah. But if we can agree the why, then, we're off to a good start in terms of desired outcomes and focus. And in terms of mindsets, well, we try and model those outcomes from the top. We don't want to have the scenario where you have an absent sponsor. We want to see those who are leading transformation throughout the process. And we want to have that kind of, ownership and passion for the change that we want to see, because transformation is ultimately a journey. We will always have resistance, and, we will see examples of busy fools who kind of seem to be, too busy to get involved. Can't get them involved in the things that we want them to do, or we have to put in workarounds because the technology and the resources are not available to us. Or we will have situations where people say, that's the way we do it, the kind of the Punch and Judy approach to being engaged with stakeholders, because actually they're not willing to change and not willing to challenge how they do things to find better alternatives. It's not my problem, or you're chasing windmills, that will never work around here. Or greenwash and blah. And I think it was Greta Thunberg who said about COP27 that, she was sick of people saying the same things over and over, because it was all about people talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And she wanted to see kind of, things that actually made a difference. And she wanted to see them now. Whereas what we seem to do is people talk a lot, but things get kicked down the line or things just change. And if we're all going to buy into this, we need to be thinking about the kind of resistance that we will face. We need to be innovative. We need to think about new approaches, creative solutions. And ultimately, if we are going to deliver those 3 Ps from responsible project management, people, planet, and prosperity, can we do that within a circular economy rather than a linear economy? And here we're thinking about, kind of reusing things, reducing things. I work in an environment in social context where we're starting to borrow more Yeah, why actually build or make something when you can borrow it? Do you actually need to own that drill? Yeah, when you can just borrow it when you need it. Yeah, and think about the resource savings. Can that apply to IT, and can that apply to systems in terms of how we go about developing the technologies that we want? That's for you to think about. And in terms of the opportunities, is there a milestone plan for helping us to transform responsibly? How do we know that we're actually making a difference along that journey? Yeah. Does the transformation environment enable us to incorporate responsibility, sustainability, and ethical values into it? And we think about the governance and assurance frameworks that we have in place here. And do we have alignment of ESG and SDG goals in order to understand the IT sector's impacts? And I was reading today actually that, you know, there's a whole bunch of new ESG frameworks coming through now. The EU are going to impose new ones, and there are, you know, in social housing, there's a brand new one for people to compare what they do with others. But we need to think about continuous improvement, and that the metrics that we're using for critical success factors, key performance indicators, information requirements, risks, assets, capabilities, return on investment, all these different things are helping us along the way and are not creating extra complexity that we can't actually demonstrate that we are making the difference that we want. Be that carbon, be that kind of, you know, inclusion, whatever our strategic challenges are we actually incorporating them in a way that we can measure our progress along the way? And I'll leave you with this kind of idea that, you know, how do you eat an elephant responsibly? The answer is one responsible bite at a time. What it isn't, and what I've seen in transformations, is everything everywhere all at once. You know, great film, won lots of Oscars, but that's not how we do transformations. But we've seen people trying to change and transform everything simultaneously, which doesn't always work. And we need to be really clear on what we're trying to do and how that fits together. And as project managers or program managers or, you know, people involved in this, we know that there are dependencies, and we know that this bit connects to that bit, and we need to do things in a way that, you know, that accommodates those dependencies and thinks about that bigger picture. So here we go. We talked about what the RPM imperatives are. We've defined what responsible transformation is, and we've talked about the various folk involved. We've thought about technology as an enabler and how it kind of can allow good transformations, but it's also responsible for bad transformations, and we've seen the consequences of that. We've looked at BCS codes of conduct, and we've thought about, you know, are these enough or too much? And I leave that for you to take away and to go back and read again and think about, you know, are you living those? Are you breathing those? Is that something that's important to you? And we've talked about moral, ethical, and professional standards and how they seem to be converging at this moment in time, because we, you know, we have that control, we have that influence. Whether we're a programmer or we are a strategic leader driving transformation, we're all part of making things better and you know, delivering transformations that actually make a difference. And we've talked about, you know, kind of how you can make a bigger difference in what you do and becoming more reflexive by wanting to know what the different contexts are. And here are a few references that I think will be in the slide pack available to you, which kind of give you an opportunity just to follow up on some of these things. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll take any questions in the few minutes that we have left.
So everyone, we're delighted to hear your responses, your observations and questions and so on. Anybody who is bursting to go, please, you're most welcome to unmute and talk to us. Turn your video on as well if you dare to. If you want to just attract our attention, there's always the hands up thing. And then the last option, of course, is the obvious and easy one. It's put your questions, comments and responses into the chat system. So please do make your responses. And sorry, I'm being climbed on by the cat here. So I shall leave you to that. Thank you.
So I've got a question, Brendan. So you talked about the you know, other professions and the idea of you know, kind of being struck off, and I think, you know, some of those other professions, medicine, accountancy, law, you know, in a sense you have to be a member of the professional body before you can practice, and if you get struck off you can no longer practice. I mean, I just wonder what your trajectory is, what you imagine the trajectory is for professionalism in IT. You know, will we become a more regulated kind of industry in that way?
I think that's a question to throw at Rashik next week, sorry. But my involvement as you know, sort of in addition to being sort of lead verifier for the registered project professional, which led to chartered project professional, was yes. we're trying to create a scenario where, you know, you are qualified before you do that. And we want people to recruit people who have got that kind of status because they are, you know, all round good eggs, for want of a better expression, but you trust them. You believe that they're competent because the professional body has had that role in assessing and evaluating whether they have that competence to be able to deliver. And we sadly, I think, still at this point in time, work in a world of cowboys, yeah, and cowgirls, yeah, you know, kind of people who don't necessarily have all the skills, who, you know, I'm not saying that you have to be a chartered IT professional or a chartered project professional, but you certainly need to demonstrate your competence in the way that people believe you, whether that's from you know, the time that you've invested in the path through experience. But what better way than to have that signed off in some way, so that, you know, your peer group has recognized your competence, so that you can be trusted. And I do believe that if you make those big mistakes, you should be struck off, just as you would a doctor, just as you would be disbarred if you were a lawyer.
If I can follow up on that point, Brendan and John, I'm actually a member of the the professional conduct disciplinary panel for BCS. So there is a proper process for looking where people have acted in an inappropriate way. I don't think it meets very often. I've not really been involved in any cases. So maybe we need to look inwardly at perhaps whether we should be looking more at the ethical approach of people, and should this just apply to BCS? I mean, if we're acting as the nation's front runner as a body, then maybe we should be looking at the disciplinary action on people who are not in BCS as well. We don't have that power, I don't think, but we should be edging towards that, and that's probably one of the points I might raise next week.
I think that's a very radical view, and I kind of, you know, I'll be, sadly I won't be there to hear that, but I do think that you know, as individuals, we can have that accountability, we can have that responsibility, and, you know, kind of our role in the transformation starts with us individually, but, you know, who's going to strike off Google, who's going to strike off Facebook? Do you know what I mean? It is often the kind of the customers and the kind of the vested interest that vote with their feet and say, you know, I don't want to use you anymore because you're not operating in a way that's good. And once we get that kind of feedback from society, I think that will drive change. I think we're already seeing signs of that. You know, people demand more in terms of equity and inclusion, but not everybody has that same sort of view of, you know, what's responsible. I think climate change, yes, people have accepted that, but there are lots of examples where people don't agree with what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I'm just following up on that. There's the way that we treat whistleblowers as well. I mean, in principle, we're supposed to give them an airing and not threaten them, but I'm not sure, you know, how well that's going, to be honest. So that's a good barometer, really, of where we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that.
For me, as a question to you, because I know we have a couple of minutes left, basically, I'd just like you to think about what's stopping you from actually implementing these sorts of things we've been talking about across the school. Yeah, what's stopping you from kind of actually making sure that, you know, if somebody says to you, you have to do it in this way, that you push back and go, well, no, that's wrong. Yeah, perhaps we should be doing like this and having that dialogue, because sadly, I think there are too many people out there who just put their head down and get on with it.
I have a little bit of familiarity with the process for Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, and, you know, they've got their principles. They also have quite a lot of detail about threats that you might meet, which might cause you to infringe the principles. And then they have this process of, you know, escalating it within the organisation, talking to the institute, and then ultimately, you know, if you can't resolve the ethical principle, you can't resolve the ethical problem, then effectively withdrawing by resigning. So, you know, and I think that is also a reflection of the fact that, you know, there's, if you do you know, infringe the ethical principle and you get struck off, then, you know, you lose that future employment opportunities by being excluded. But yeah, I think there's a lot of scope really for people to take more responsibility and to you know, take the ethical principles to heart, I think, and act on them rather than sticking their heads in the sand and kind of letting things pass by them. Definitely, yeah.
Definitely. Well, I think we've come to the end of the time. So, John, if you want to wrap up.
We have, yeah. So thank you, Brendan, for speaking to us today and sharing your insight and your knowledge. And thank you to everyone for attending today and participating. Next week, as you know, we've got Rashik Palmer, who is CEO of the BCS. He's a BCS fellow and an IBM fellow. And there will be other members of the panel who have spoken in previous weeks. So I would encourage everybody to formulate your questions and come along next week and ask them to the panel. Same time next week. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.